it's this idea of like humanity and everyone coming together to support the Kashmir cause no matter where they are. Now we've got with us the president of Azad Jammu and Kashmir who's joining us. I'm now going to hand over to Fahim Kiani, who is president of Tehreek-e-Kashmir in UK. So Fahim, if you'd like to take over. Fahim, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Shall we start? First of all, I would like to welcome and thank you all, especially the president of the state of Azad Jammu and Kashmir and the British parliamentarians for attending this Kashmir Solidarity Conference and for expressing solidarity with the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, who are living in the most militarized area in the world under brutal Indian occupation, subjugation, and oppression for the last 73 years. There are thousands of painful stories of atrocities against the people of Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. You all know that what the Indian army is doing to Kashmiris in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The Indian army has killed thousands of Kashmiris and is using rape as a weapon of war in Kashmir. Kashmir wants your attention. We have seen genocidal fascists emerge throughout history like Hitler, Mussolini, and many others. In places like Rwanda and the Balkans, we have seen firsthand what happens when the world turns a blind eye. It is imperative that MPs play the role in preventing a repeat of history before it's too late. Thank you very much. Freedom for all, freedom for Kashmir.
Thank you, Fahim. I'm now going to hand over to His Excellency Sarjar Masood Khan, President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much. And it is good evening here in Pakistan. It is good morning or probably good afternoon in the United Kingdom. Mr. Fahim Kiani, once again, you have assembled so many members of Parliament of the United Kingdom, and I'm grateful to you. You would recall that last year, on the eve of the 5th of February, I was in London, and in the House of Commons, Mr. Paul Bristow had hosted a meeting of the MPs and Lords, and we didn't know at that time that we'd be hit by COVID-19. 1 year later, we are Can you hear me?
We can hear you now, yes.
All right. Shall I start all over again, or did you listen to part of what I was saying?
President, we heard the beginning of the speech. It was just a few seconds, so you can continue.
All right. What I'm saying is that this time, this is. Can you hear me now?
Yes, President, we can hear you.
All right. My picture goes static after a while, and so that's why I pause. But presuming that you have listened to my introductory remarks, let me pay a compliment and tribute to Mr. Fahim Kiani and Tehreek-e-Kashmir, United Kingdom, and Tehreek-e-Kashmir, Europe, an organization which has been working for the cause of Kashmir, for the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir for the past 40 years, 4 decades. And we are beholden to you, the people of Jammu and Kashmir are beholden to you for this consistent and steadfast support to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. I would also like to recognize the initiative that was taken by Ms. Sarah Owens by tabling a motion for a debate in the House of Commons recently. And this debate has made a stir not just in the United Kingdom, in Pakistan, in Jammu and Kashmir, but also in India, because there was a sharp reaction to this debate, and the Indians are arguing that this was an interference in their internal affairs. They forget that Kashmir is an international issue. It is on the agenda of the United Nations Security Council. It is not India's internal matter. It is not even a bilateral matter. It's a trilateral matter. It is a matter which pertains to the political future of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So our thanks to the House of Commons for once again holding this very substantive debate. And the themes that they highlighted, the right to self-determination, human rights violations, the role of the Security Council, the responsibility of the United Kingdom in the Security Council. These themes were most appropriate, and they captured the essence of the deteriorating situation in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and the need to do something urgently. So I thank all those MPs who participated in that debate and shone a light on this issue, this very serious issue in world politics. I would also take this opportunity to thank Mr. Andrew Gwynn, for instance, for starting this Labour Friends of Kashmir group. Also, Mr. Paul Bristow and James Daly, who are co-chairs of Conservative Friends of Kashmir group. And also, Mr. Phil Bennion has told us that Lib Dems have also constituted a Friends of Kashmir group. This is in addition to the all-party parliamentary group on Kashmir, which has a cross-party membership of 76. This shows that beyond party politics, a very critical mass in the United Kingdom Parliament is supporting the cause of Kashmir, is calling for the protection of the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. It is calling out India's crimes against humanity. So we thank you all. Now, let me come straight to the situation as it prevails in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Most of you are aware of the development since August the 5th, 2019. But the situation is deteriorating. And the most serious crime against humanity that is being committed right now, it may well be called genocide, is land grab in the occupied territory, and also illegal transfer of millions of Hindus from all over India into the Kashmir territory. This is an occupied territory. This is a disputed territory. And India is committing these crimes in violation of the 4th Geneva Convention, Additional Protocol 1, Genocide Convention of 1948, and also ICC Statute. There are a raft of treaties and conventions which would condemn these actions, these brazen actions being taken by India to change the demographic composition. And they're doing it at a fast pace. I can tell you that in the past Kashmiris into that territory, and they're swamping the territory with Hindus who are non-natives, and they announce openly that they want to increase this number to 5 to 6 million in the next 2 to 3 years. Now, this would no more remain the state of Jammu and Kashmir in 2 to 3 years if this valley of Kashmir and Jammu continue to be swamped with outsiders from a different faith, because India is turning it into a communal fault line, a communal issue, and so that they prepare the ground for denying the right to self-determination to the people of Jammu and Kashmir, which they had pledged to the United Nations Security Council, to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So that's not all. As a matter of fact, Kashmiris are being killed every day. Young men are gunned down in cordon search operations. Women are being raped, as it was mentioned by Fahim Kiani, and there are forced disappearances. There are incarcerations, massive incarcerations. In fact, thousands of young men, including teenage boys and children, they are in these concentration camps inside the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And some of them have been moved to the most notorious prison houses in northern India. Now, there they're being indoctrinated. These detainees are being tortured, and they have been booked under PSA, Public Safety Act, which is a lawless law as per Amnesty International's characterization. Because for 2 years, you can't have access to a lawyer, an attorney, and your relatives can't meet you. So it's a black law, it's a draconian law, and anybody who utters the word Azadi, even 3 to 4 to 5-year-old child, he would be booked. I'm not exaggerating. This has been substantiated by independent sources. So what I want to say is that India is committing these crimes against humanity, genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, systematically, but the world is not holding India accountable. I mean, we're grateful to the parliaments, the UK Parliament. We are grateful to the European Parliament, which last year tabled half a dozen resolutions. 626 MEPs belonging to diverse groups. They tabled these half a dozen resolutions. And they castigated India for its crimes. They also demanded that Kashmiris be given justice. And this was later on, of course, these resolutions did not pass because India sabotaged them under the pretext that Mr. Narendra Modi, the violent extremist leader of India, was about to visit Brussels. So what we are facing is that while we have this overwhelming support from the media, from the parliaments, from civil society, they have spoken up, and I want to compliment the United Kingdom Parliament once again, because you have led the way. You have shown this path of speaking up for Kashmiris to the rest of the world. So we're grateful to you. But governments are tight-lipped. 10 Downing Street is tight-lipped. It hasn't even made an ambivalent condemnation, or FCO equivocates. And then, of course, you have, for instance, other powerful nations, their capitals, Washington, DC, Brussels, EU, for instance, or even the Secretary General. He is concerned about the risk of a war between India and Pakistan, but he doesn't talk about Kashmiris at all, as if they are not part of this planet, as if it is not part of his writ and remit, because according to the Charter, it is the responsibility of the United Nations Secretary General and also of the President of the Security Council to protect the people of Jammu and Kashmir, to save them from the scourge of war, a war that has been imposed on the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So it's a hands-off approach. It's everybody knows that these zealots in India who are ruling India, they are fascists. They are pursuing this fascist doctrine of Hindutva, this time in the name of religious superiority. And yet the world is appeasing them, looking the other way. In fact, most of the Western countries are supplying weapons, arms, and ammunition to the occupier, this new colonial power in South Asia, and empowering that state economically and politically and strategically and militarily to crush the people of Jammu and Kashmir. I have said that the intelligence agencies of the United Kingdom, European Union, United States, they have sophisticated apparatus to ascertain facts on the ground. I mean, they are getting this information despite all sorts of restrictions in Kashmir. They're getting all sorts of information about the crimes that are being committed there. The world is not uninformed, and yet they choose to look the other way. This is, I call, either complicity, deliberate complicity, or dereliction of obligation. Now, let me also tell you that India has once again been exposed. It had set up 750 fake entities and accounts, and this has been, its crimes have been exposed by Disinfo Lab. And what was their target? The target was the European Union, European Parliament. They were misleading them. And what were their targets as far as South Asia was concerned? Pakistan and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And they've been telling lies, not only to the Europeans, but to the people in the United States, United Kingdom, and the world citizenry and decision makers, that they are fighting terrorism in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They are not fighting terrorism. They are crushing and brutalizing unarmed, non-combatant civilians. And this has to stop if we are really interested in upholding and sustaining the new world order that was put together in the aftermath of the Second World War. If we really want the rule of law at the international level, then we'll have to stop this monstrous juggernaut of India, of imperialism. And India is seeking exceptionalism. It thinks that it is above the law, that it is not accountable to anybody. So it can take any decision unilaterally and get away with murder. Now, I would say that I'll come to the operative part. And what is it that such distinguished MPs can do who are gathered here, members of the Parliament of the United Kingdom? Right now, you are our mainstay. As a matter of fact, we seek your succor and support. We thank you for all you have done. I'm sure that many of you have personally suffered from COVID-19, and I congratulate them on surviving this very, very lethal virus. And the United Kingdom is still passing through a very difficult phase. So Kashmir may not be uppermost in the minds of the British Parliament, but I'm touched by your presence today, that you take time to discuss Kashmir and you're trying to strive to seek some solution, some resolution of this dispute. And you feel for the Kashmiris because you want to save them from the scourge of war and devastation and annihilation and impending annihilation. Now, what are the operative parts? I would say that the United Kingdom is a member of the Security Council. Please talk to your FCO. Ms. Debbie Abrahams wrote a letter to Mr. Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, and there are other active members who've been communicating with the Foreign Office, either openly or confidentially. We're grateful to them. Also, please talk to your Prime Minister, because the voice of the executive matters, and they should send instructions to the permanent delegation, the United Kingdom's permanent delegation in the Security Council, to lend support to a debate on Kashmir, and in fact, a movement towards a product, a resolution, some sort of presidential statement. And United Kingdom can play a really important, pivotal role in this regard. I think that when I was in London last year, and I want to repeat that while you gather Friends of Kashmir in the Labour Party, Friends of Kashmir in the Conservative Party, the Lib Dems, SNP, all of them, they should reach out to the Human Rights Council, to the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Michel Bachelet, or the council itself. Your voice would matter. As a matter of fact, the communique that you adopt today, if you are going to adopt a communique, that should be sent to the High Commissioner for Human Rights and to the Secretary General of the United Nations and President of the Security Council, because the situation, the deteriorating situation in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir is also a potent threat to peace and security in the region, because India and Pakistan are nuclear weapon states, and because of miscalculation, because of the brutalization of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, the situation can deteriorate to a point where it can escalate to a conventional or even a strategic confrontation between the two countries. I would say that the United Kingdom parliamentarians still have a clout with the European Parliament. Please use that with France, with Germany, with Southern European countries, with Ireland, other countries, and they would heed your voice, your advice, your counsel. I think that IPU is another forum, Interparliamentary Union. They are in the corridors. I mean, even if it is not possible to table something in the IPU formally, you can, in corridors, start these conversations. I will add to that Commonwealth, where the United Kingdom has immense influence. I can tell you that ASEAN, for instance, on this region comprising 10 countries, they have also established in 7 parliaments, Friends of Kashmir group. The word should spread that the international community, the lawmakers of the world, would not countenance genocide taking place before their eyes, that they would stop this crime in the 21st century. Now, at the same time, you represent constituents. My appeal to you is to tell your constituents, make them aware of the horrendous crimes taking place in Kashmir. And we need a civil rights movement, an international civil rights movement, like the movement against apartheid or colonialism or Vietnam War or fascism last century or Nazism, a civil rights movement. Because if the civil rights of Kashmiris are being trampled, I think that the civil rights of the entire humanity are being trampled. We do not live in silos anymore. We're one big global village. I think that it would be appropriate to impose sanctions against India, economic sanctions, and discourage investment going towards India, because that empowers India to commit its crimes in the occupied territory. So, and boycott some of its products, as a matter of fact. This movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement has started in one form or the other. It must be crystallized and mobilized in an organized fashion. I can also give you the feedback that some British MPs had asked last time whether the OIC was doing something. We have mobilized the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and in November last year, 57 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, they adopted the strongest ever resolution on the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir and the brutalities taking place there. They made an inventory of the crimes that India was committing, and they said, stop this genocide. This was the clearest voice in the recent past on India's crimes and in regard to a series of demands to put an end to repression in Kashmir. So we are beholden to the OIC, but we have to move beyond statements and resolutions and debates, and we have to move towards action. Finally, I would say that why would we appease genocidaires in this day and age? Why would we condone their actions? What kind of world order do we want? And why would these genocidaires in India and in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir would get off scot-free? Why? Because they belong to a big nation and they have license to kill these helpless Kashmiris as if they do not belong to humanity. So my last point is that today we convey this message to Srinagar and to all the peoples of the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that you are not alone, you are not deserted by the international community, because the Kashmir Solidarity Day is being celebrated all over the world. More than 100 countries are marking this, not celebrating, they're observing this day, marking this day in probably hundreds of cities and towns. So if it was an internal matter of India, why would such a big number of influential MPs gather in the United Kingdom on the eve of the Kashmir Solidarity Day? So our message to you is that you are not alone. The international community is standing with you, standing by you, and we will continue our struggle till you get justice, till you get your freedom and liberty and self-determination. And I can also tell you that this day, because of the tireless efforts made by Tehreek-e-Kashmir and other diaspora community organizations, has become an international day, and the Kashmir movement is fast transforming into an international movement for justice for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that detailed address. I'm now going to bring on Robbie Moore, who is the MP for Keeling. So, Robbie, are you there? Yes, he is. So, Robbie, we would like to respond to Mr. President's statement.
Yes, thank you very much, and it's an honour to follow you, Your Excellency, and thank you very much for inviting me along as the Member of Parliament for Keighley to this conference. It's very much appreciated. I think the first few things that I would like to say is representing a strong population of Pakistani Kashmiri, how distraught I am to hear about what is going on in Kashmir at the moment. And to hear of the changes that have taken place over the last 12 months or so is devastating. You know, and I have constituents that have obviously family in the Indian occupied area of Kashmir, where reports are coming directly to me as the Member of Parliament, and it's distressing. So I was lucky enough to speak in the Houses of Parliament 10 days or so ago in the debate that we had here. And it was very well received, and it was a good, strong debate. And it certainly brought some of the distress that everyone is experiencing to the forefront. And I've got to say, to hear of the human rights issues that are happening is pretty bad. Now, obviously, as members of Parliament, we can't define the domestic policy which is happening elsewhere. But what we can do as individual members of Parliament is put pressure on our government to use its influence on the national stage to raise this to the highest of the agendas. And that's certainly what I'm doing as a member of Parliament. And what I would like to see is the United Nations take access and to investigate exactly what's going on and to report it back, because it does no one any good for this to carry on and for a solution not to be found. So I want to provide you all with the reassurance that I will do what I can as a British Member of Parliament to use my influence and to put pressure on the government here in the UK to use its influence to ensure that a solution can be found once and for all. And can I just thank you very much again for your time in inviting me along to speak briefly at this conference. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Robbie. I'm now going to bring on Jill Furness wanted to join us, and she sent her remarks, but she had to leave early. Can I bring on Tony Lloyd now? Hello, Tony. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. Kashmir Solidarity Day tomorrow will bring Kashmiris together, but it will also bring actually all those in the world who believe in human rights. And where the president was right in his remarks before is that New Delhi, the Indian government can never claim that this is an internal matter only for India, for two reasons. One, because the dispute about the status of Kashmir has not been settled since the partition of India those many years ago. I'm very clear, people in this country are very clear, that the United Nations declarations that only the Kashmiri people could determine their own boundaries, their own settlements, has got to be honoured. So it is an international issue, but an international issue that can only be localised by the Kashmiri people. But the second point I would make is that human rights belong to everybody. An abuse of human rights in Jammu and Kashmir by the Indian occupying forces are horrendous. The rape of women, the murder of people, the imprisonment of the innocent, the attacks on children, all of these things are a shame to India, but they're a shame to the world. And for those reasons, as I look forward to Kashmiri Solidarity Day tomorrow, I will be with my Kashmiri friends, my Kashmiri constituents, but I will be with the Kashmiri diaspora and Kashmiris in both parts of Kashmir, saying we live in solidarity with you. Your struggle must be our struggle, and in the end, you will be victorious. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to go on to Steve Baker. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. President, thank you very much for this opportunity to stand in solidarity with you and with Kashmir. As somebody who represents thousands of British Kashmiris, of course, I'm very pleased to do so. And I particularly want to pay tribute to the new MPs, if I may, who are here. Delighted to see Robbie on the call and to have heard from him. The 2010 Parliament, for me, felt perhaps a bit lonely in the Conservative Party. And although I know some Labour MPs may lament it, I consider myself blessed indeed that we've now perhaps slightly more evenly spread amongst the parties an acute constituency interest in Kashmir. And I particularly want to pay tribute to Paul Bristow, who's chairing Conservative Friends of Kashmir very ably. As Paul and I have been learning, there is a very strong Indian lobby in the UK and in the Conservative Party, and we have needed to explain to them that the issue of Kashmir is very present in our constituencies, that we are under an obligation to represent the concerns of the thousands of constituents that we represent. It's not something that we can neglect or forget or set aside because it's inconvenient for some others. So it's because of my residents that I wish to stand in solidarity with Kashmir. And every time we speak up on this issue, every time we appear on something like this, streaming live on YouTube, being recorded, we always come under pressure to stop speaking up. And I have to say to people on the Indian side of the line of control, we're just not going to, all of the time these well-documented abuses take place. I can assure anyone in India that I've got no interest in interfering in the politics of India. I'd be delighted if I did not need to speak on Indian politics ever again. I wish to respect India as a large and important secular democracy, but if only it was behaving as a large and important secular democracy with a duty to lead on common human rights applicable to all. I put together a bit of a dossier of certain abuses. I just want to read from a story on the BBC website, not known for its inaccuracy, however much some of my colleagues and I may occasionally dispute it. But it is well known for the quality of its reporting. An article on the 16th of May 2019 titled "India's Muslims Fear for Their Future Under Narendra Modi." I'm going to read literally from the article on the BBC site. In January last year, that was 2018, an 8-year-old Muslim girl was taking the family's horses to graze when she was kidnapped in Kathua district in Indian administered Kashmir. Held captive for a week in a Hindu temple, she was drugged and repeatedly gang raped and tortured before she was murdered. A police report filed afterwards said the crime was part of a plan by a group of Hindu men to drive the nomadic Muslim Bakerwall community that she belonged to away from the area. Later it says, it describes the aftermath of some protests and particularly says that people marched not in solidarity with the victim and her family, but instead marched rather in solidarity with those accused. And the article says, two BJP ministers serving in the state government, Chaudhry Lal Singh and Chandra Prakash Ganja, were among those who took to the streets to support the alleged perpetrators. That is what it says on the BBC website. And I have to say to people listening to this, demanding that British MPs stay out of the politics of India, I'd be delighted to stay out of the politics of India, but incidents like that must absolutely come to an end. And it's in the interests of everyone in India to put pressure on their politicians to behave with the proper regard to the rights of every person. And until that is happening, I have to say, as somebody who represents thousands of British Kashmiris in the UK, you can expect us all to stand up in solidarity with Kashmir on behalf of our constituents. It's our duty and it is our right to do so, and we are not going to stop. So, Mr. President, thank you once again for giving us this opportunity to stand in solidarity with you. I know from my meetings with him that the Foreign Secretary appreciates the strength of feeling amongst members of Parliament. And I think following a conversation I had with him, he knows that our understandable desire to provide a counterweight to China through our relationship with India cannot allow us to turn a blind eye to what is going on in Kashmir. So thank you for this opportunity to speak up. And I look forward to hearing from other contributors who I hope will forgive me when in about 10 minutes I disappear to lead the adjournment debate in the House of Commons, but I'm afraid I must do that because I'm on the order paper. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Steve Baker, for that, for your input. I'm now going to bring on Hilary Benn, who's MP for Leeds Central. Hilary Benn, are you there?
Myself. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed. Can I say good evening to you, President Khan. Thank you very much for joining us today and for giving us an update on the situation. I too am here today, as are all members of the House of Commons, to speak up on behalf of our Kashmiri constituents who feel so strongly and passionately and with such pain about what is happening in Kashmir at the moment. I thought the list of proposals that you made, Mr. President, about the steps that need to be taken are very helpful. There must be an end to violence on all sides. There must be unfettered access to Jammu and Kashmir so that the human rights abuses, which have been widely documented and reported, can be investigated. And as you know, I have long supported, as have all of my colleagues, a debate at the UN Security Council on this matter. It's really important that that takes place. The one other thing I would say is that, like all conflicts, and this is a terrible and a long-lasting conflict that has impacted on so many people's lives for so long, there will need to be a political solution. And for there to be a political solution, there has to be dialogue. And for there to be dialogue, that will have to involve the governments of Pakistan and of India. And therefore, as we continue to feel great sadness and distress at what is going on in Jammu and Kashmir and speak out about those abuses, we must also keep our eye on the only means that is available in the end to resolve this crisis and to allow the people of Kashmir to finally achieve the only thing they've ever wanted, which is the chance to determine their own future so that they may live in peace and prosperity with all, including their neighbours, over the years ahead. And I will continue to do all I can, as I know all of my parliamentary colleagues will do, to try and bring that day forward where political process can end the horrors of which we are reminded every time we join one of these very important conferences. And I'd like to join others in expressing my thanks to you for organising today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Ben, for your input there. I'm now going to have on John Spiller MP.
Thank you very much, Osmo. Thank you, Mr. President. Also, thank you to the organisation for putting this together. And I think the numbers attending shows the importance that members of Parliament attach to this very important cause, and what has been described already as probably one of the world's longest conflicts. Not a distinction, I'm sure, that the people of Kashmir welcome, because, as Hilary Benn has just said, they want to be able to live their lives in peace. And some colleagues already mentioned the abuses that are taking place, the curfews, the arrests, torture, rapes, beatings, and disappearances, a very familiar pattern, I must say, also in other parts, for example, in the Punjab. And one of the defenses of the Indian administration is that this is an internal matter. But quite frankly, as I said in the debate the President kindly mentioned, you cannot have an internal matter when you have such a situation of conflict and also two nuclear powers facing each other in the area. That has to be a matter of international concern as well, and international stability in what is one of the world's flashpoints now is extremely important. And unfortunately also, what is happening in Kashmir is part of a broader pattern of what's happening elsewhere in India. We have, for example, in Assam, the national register issue, where over 1 million people have basically been rendered stateless. We have, starting off in the Punjab, we had the issue of the farmers and the change in the law, which has greatly disadvantaged the small and medium-sized farmers. And while that started in the Punjab and was initially very much an issue for the Sikh community, that has spread to other parts, other states of India, and to other communities. Again, changing the law, changing long-established procedures, very familiar pattern, as you, Mr. President, rightly pointed out, with regard to the change in the law, internationally established procedures with regard to Jammu and Kashmir, both in regard to land ownership and also with regard to population. Now, these are matters of much broader concern, and interestingly enough, also of concern to the opposition parties in India, who you will recall were denied the ability to visit Jammu and Kashmir in order to make their assessment. It's not just the international community not being able to go there to form a judgment. Even their own parliamentarians were prevented. And we're seeing now, unfortunately, also a spread of intolerance of other religions, many of them with tens, if not hundreds of millions of adherents. And the attempt also then to change the balance, again, as an occupied territory, in defiance of international norms in Jammu and Kashmir. So that's representing our constituents, but also concern for international justice, is why there are so many of us here today, why we declare our solidarity with the people of Kashmir on Kashmir Independence Day, and look forward to working with you across party for the future to finally bring justice, peace, and freedom for the people of Kashmir.
Thank you, John. I'm now going to bring on Yasmin Qureshi.
Good evening, Your Excellency, and good afternoon, my colleagues. Firstly, can I thank Fahim for organising this, and Fuzma for you for organising the seminar today. I just wanted to, I've been putting a few comments in the chat because I thought I might not get a chance to speak. But I really wanted to say that I think the situation in Kashmir is really, really urgent now. You see, beforehand, we had a much more secular governments. And although things, you know, the issue of Kashmir's resolution was there, I think that with the Modi government and the specific policy they are pursuing of Hindutva and the kind of making India a Hindu nation, and with the rules and the laws that they have passed recently, where, for example, people outside the state of Kashmir now can come and work and hold public offices. Also, the fact that they've divided it up into 2 different districts with direct control from the central government, it's really a way of trying to ensure that you make the situation de facto so difficult that any kind of attempts to have a resolution, such as a referendum or plebiscite, becomes difficult. And already we know that many thousands and thousands of people have moved in from outside Kashmir, but from other parts of India, and have taken residence and public official civil service types of jobs, which they weren't allowed to do so. So all I will say is that I know that my parliamentary colleagues on the screen here, irrespective of the party political, have been now working on this issue. And all I can promise is that, and tomorrow is an incredibly sad day, but I can just say that I will continue to press hard for the matter of the people of Jammu and Kashmir to be resolved in the way that they want it to be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. Can I now have Stephen Timms, MP, please?
Thank you very much. Very pleased to be able to join this, and Mr. President, very pleased to see you here. One of my constituents has a brother who's a doctor in Islamabad. They're both from Kashmir. Together, they built a new home in their home village, which is the village of Tejan in Sharda subdivision of the Neelam Valley, about 5 kilometers from the line of control. Their new home was destroyed together with 4 other homes that the family owns in the village, destroyed in shelling by the Indian military on the 13th of November. 1 person was injured, the whole family was left homeless. And I've written to the Indian High Commissioner about this. I haven't had a reply, but I thought I would just raise this when you're with us, Mr. President, because I do wonder whether a family in that situation may be able to get some help from the Azad Kashmir authorities to try and put their lives back together after something so dreadful has happened to them. As others have said, we're all hearing very frequent reports of all sorts of arbitrary killings, very bad things going on in Indian-occupied Kashmir, being carried out by Indian troops. A number of the emergency measures put in place in the summer of 2019 have still not been lifted. Last time we had a meeting like this, I asked about the communications interruption, the closure of the telecommunications networks and so on. And I know at that time that was still in place, and I understand that those problems are still a feature of people's lives. And I think the point I'd want to identify with is the point that Hilary Benn made, that in the end, there's going to have to be a political solution. The idea that so many troops being deployed in Jammu and Kashmir for so long is ever going to solve this problem or lead to any resolution of this problem is clearly not sustainable. There has to be dialogue, there has to be a resolution. That's the only way that the people of Jammu and Kashmir are going to achieve the peace that they're entitled to and that all of us want them to enjoy. And with all of my colleagues, I shall continue to work to that end in the months ahead. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to join this afternoon.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm now going to go over to Nadia Whittam, MP. Nadia Whittam.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you for organising this important event. I think it's really crucial that we keep gathering like this and discussing the ongoing crisis in Kashmir. I remain extremely concerned about the ongoing human rights abuses perpetrated by the Indian government towards the people of Kashmir, the shutting down of democracy and the shutting down of dissent, and of course the ongoing lockdown as well. And as colleagues have already said, this is not an internal matter for the Indian government. It's an international injustice, and all of us must stand firmly on the right side of that and be putting pressure on our own government to be using all diplomatic means possible and necessary to bring an end to this conflict. I called a long time ago for international observers to be sent to the region in light of the well-documented human rights abuses, and also for the suspension of British arms being sold for use by the Indian Army. And it's important that
Apologies for that. Could I get participants who are not speaking to mute their mics, please? Mr. Suleiman, can you mute your mic, please? Thank you.
Thanks, that's all right, don't worry. And just lastly, for our government to publicly support the plebiscite that was made at the time of accession, because that in itself would be a powerful statement from the UK government. And John Speller and other colleagues are absolutely right to highlight that this takes place in the context of a far-right BJP government, and one that's driven by a Hindutva ideology and also a growing grassroots far right in the name of the RSS in India. And it's important that we stand, of course, with the people of Kashmir, but also with people resisting the government in India. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nadia. I'm now going to go on to Richard Bergen. I'm just going for everyone very quickly because we're running out of time. So, Richard Bergen, MP.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. President. And it's great to see so many parliamentary colleagues on a cross-party basis gathering to mark this important date and discuss this important issue. It is important that we mark Kashmir Solidarity Day. My constituency in Leeds East is home to thousands of people who were either born in Kashmir or whose parents and grandparents were born in Kashmir. And they have friends who live in Kashmir, they have family who live in Kashmir. And so every day that self-determination is denied to the people of Kashmir, that's a pain not only to the people in Kashmir, but a pain that people in my community and in the community of MPs on this call feel. Every day, the human rights abuses perpetrated by the government of India continue. Is a day of pain for the people in Indian occupied Kashmir and for their friends, family, and descendants in my community and in the communities of other members of Parliament on this call. It is, of course, the case that the UK has a special duty to the people of Kashmir, a special duty to do whatever we can to help resolve this situation. And the United Nations, of course, has to fulfill its promise, decades old, in resolutions from 1948, to allow the people of Kashmir what really is their birthright and should be everyone's birthright, the right to self-determination, the right to determine their own future in a free and fair plebiscite. That needs to happen. And of course, people around the world have been struggling with the inevitable hardship caused by lockdowns due to coronavirus. But even before coronavirus, the people of Kashmir were having to endure a lockdown put upon them by the government of India. The human rights abuses that take place every day are something that we need to speak out about. It's heartbreaking that the people of Kashmir have had to wait decade after decade after decade for justice, the right to self-determination, and an end to those human rights abuses. So I think we all need to resolve to do everything we can to turn the words that we've spoken at so many meetings, to turn those words into realities. That means the United Kingdom recognising its responsibility now, but also its historic responsibility. And that means the United Nations as well, fulfilling its promises. And like many others, I've been disturbed at the reports of the government of India making changes which could seek to skew the outcome of a plebiscite. It needs to be fair, and it needs to be free, and it needs to take place. So on this day and always, I want to offer my solidarity to the people of Kashmir. And I know that so many in my community across this country and around the world are also thinking of Kashmir as we tomorrow mark Kashmir Solidarity Day.
Thank you, Richard Bergen. I'm now going to pass on to James Daly.
Thank you very much, and it's very good to see you again, Mr. President. After listening to such articulate contributions from colleagues, there is very little to say in one sense, except that as somebody who was lucky enough to go in the last 12 months to Kashmir, to the line of control, to speak to people, I remember the people in the refugee camp in Courtley, when I went with my colleague Mark Eastwood and Debbie Abrahams and Sarah Britcliffe. When I talked to those people, they told me and highlighted the injuries that they had suffered and what they had gone through and what their families continue to go through. This is an issue that is seared on my conscience. And as long as I'm a member of Parliament for my seat, where I have a large Kashmiri diaspora, I will do everything I can to stand up for human rights, for freedom, and for basic humanity. I agree with every word that Hilary Benn said, and I don't intend to repeat. Hilary has said it in a far better way than I. But I just want to say as a lawyer, one thing and highlight one thing, the continued arrest without trial, the Public Safety Act, people being kept in detention for years without trial is an absolute abomination. And it's just one of many reasons why I and everyone on this call I know stands shoulder to shoulder with all Kashmiris. And this is a fight that can never give up, but it's a political fight. The Indian and Pakistani government are going to have to speak to each other through the United Nations. And I certainly on a personal level, I will do everything I can to add my voice to those calls for peace, for freedom, and for the Kashmiri people to be able to choose how they want to live, where they want to live, and to make the decisions for them and their families to live in peace and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to bring on Rachel Hopkins, MP.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everybody, and Mr. President. Much has been said already at this conference, and it is always good to see that there's such cross-party support around the Kashmiri issue. I represent many people in Luton South. Indeed, I have friends who are of Kashmiri origin, and I've been very aware of the difficulties over many decades, but particularly since August 2019, when India occupied and made significant difficulties for the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And one issue I've been reflecting on recently is the impact on children's education. Last week, it was the UN International Day of Education, and many people spoke about that. But we know that over the last 18 months, almost 14,000 schools have been closed, both public and private schools in Kashmir. The shutdown of 4G internet connection is making huge difficulties for people to get online and learn. And this is going to have a terrible impact on children and young people's future because their education has been so impacted. And so I think I join with others in our calls for a solution to the issues in Kashmir. The fact there does need to be political dialogue and the right for Kashmiris for their own self-determination. And I stand again shoulder to shoulder with the people of Kashmir in that fight. So thank you for inviting me today. Solidarity for Kashmiri Day tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to bring on Kate Holland MP. Kate Holland.
Sorry, I was struggling with the microphone there. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. President and Fahim for organising this conference, because whilst we're all going through a global pandemic and constantly looking at ways for our communities to get back to normal, for different nations to work together to solve this crisis, it is important that we don't forget that human rights violation that's happened in Kashmir and this crisis that has been long-lived in that area. I hear of atrocities from the communities I represent in Blackburn, and it breaks my heart when I hear of families torn apart, not knowing where their families are, not knowing if they're safe. It's absolutely heartbreaking. We all know the difficulties of lockdown, but Kashmir has been in an absolute brutal lockdown since August 2019. The lockdown, along with the communications blackout, which has led to a profound and far-reaching impact on every aspect of life in Kashmir, including health services, school closures, and press freedom. And even Amnesty International, one of the few human rights organisations working in Kashmir, was forced to close in September 2020 after the Indian government froze its bank account. But now there's a real opportunity for our government to raise the concerns at the upcoming meeting in March. And it is important that we accept our historical role in the situation in Kashmir. And I'm very pleased that this is cross-party, because this is a real chance for our government to broker a deal, get a dialogue going, and work with both India and Pakistan to make sure that the people of Kashmir are safe, have got the basic human rights that they need. And please urge everyone to give confidence to the people of Kashmir that we are here fully behind them. And certainly long before I was an MP, I've been campaigning for Kashmir. And I think after 73 years, it's time that nations came together, and the UK government played a key role in bringing communities together, finding a peaceful solution, and please encourage all MPs to lobby, whichever party we're from, to lobby to make sure that the people of Kashmir are given their right to decide on their future. We are here to help and support, and we will make sure that we can do everything we possibly can in that role. I'm extremely pleased that the Shadow Minister, Stephen Kinnock, has been very, very active and is totally committed to working with the government on finding this solution. Once again, thank you very much for inviting me, and let's hope that in the next meeting we can actually see a way forward, because as I say, there's a meeting in March, and that's the UK government's time, a real opportunity to play a key role in finding a solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to bring on Sarah Brickcliffe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Firstly, good evening, and it's great to see you again, President Khan, albeit virtually. And as my colleague James Daly said, we actually had the chance to visit in the last 12 months, and thank you everybody for having me, and for those who have worked so hard in getting this set up. I'm sure we would all much prefer to be together in person as we've done previously. But it's still great that we can do it. And what we need to recognise is how our lockdown experiences actually differ from those in Kashmir, how we actually have the ability to do this and have direct contact with our families and friends without fear. We can contact our loved ones, and this hasn't been the case for the people of Kashmir due to the curfews and the restrictions that have been in place, and everybody should be entitled to their basic human rights, everyone. And I have to agree with everything that my colleague and friend said, Steve Baker. We don't want to have to get involved with this, but until things change, we always will. I represent Hindbed and Haslingden, the constituency at the heart of East Lancashire. And after being a councillor, the mayoress, and now the Member of Parliament, I've had the opportunity to speak to so many people and families across my constituency who are directly affected by the continued conflict in Kashmir, who have serious concerns about their family and friends' safety, and even about being able to just communicate with them. And in the world that we live in today, that shouldn't be the case for anyone. And this is, again, another basic human right that everybody will have. So as I've said, I had the opportunity in February last year to see this for myself and witness it on the ground, and we spoke with officials, but we also spoke to the men, women and children at the refugee camp, and there I had children as young as 4 years old pulling at my leg, begging for me to help them and help the families. And I heard of the rapes and innocent killings, families losing their loved ones through torture. And I also heard directly from those who had survived this. And I've said this before in debates, but there was a man who pulled up his trouser leg to show me that he had lost his leg due to the torture inflicted on him. And it was the most sobering experience of my life, and James Daly shared a car with me back home, and the tears that I cried after witnessing this, again, it was just one of the most sobering experiences, and makes you realise just how lucky we are, but how this shouldn't still be going on in the day and age that we now live in. And one issue that many have already said and very much needs to be understood is that it needs to be recognised internationally. This isn't just something that affects Pakistan and India. The international community need to recognise the consequences of no action in this, because we have nuclear powers involved, but also because everybody should have the basic human rights. We have it very lucky in this country, and after seeing what we witnessed, I count my blessings every day. But I know that my constituents have family and friends that are seriously concerned about their family's well-being and health, and the fear that I see in their eyes when they tell me about this is just something that I don't want anybody to experience. And one of the questions I always ask myself is, why do we not hear this on the media channels? It should be there. We should be telling everyone, the world, about it, and making sure that they do get involved. So I just absolutely stand up in solidarity with not just my residents, but all the people of Kashmir, all those who are affected. And as somebody who represents thousands of residents of the Kashmiri community, I'll always do with this. And I agree with everything the colleagues have said. We need to cross-party continue pushing that these people have the basic access to human rights, and I will never stop as a Member of Parliament for Hyndburn and Haslingden in trying to assure this happens. So thank you for having me this evening, and thank you to everybody who's been involved in this.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. That account was quite shocking, to be honest. I think you've seen firsthand how bad the situation is. As have many members of Parliament, because a lot of MPs have actually visited the region, so they've witnessed firsthand what the situation's like. I'm now going to bring on Lillian Greenwood, MP.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, colleagues, thank you for inviting me to speak this afternoon ahead of Kashmir Independence Day, not only on behalf of the thousands of constituents of mine in Nottingham South who have friends and family in Jammu and Kashmir, but also for all those who care about human rights across the world. One doesn't need to be a Kashmiri or represent a Kashmiri community to stand in solidarity with the people of Kashmir and their struggle for self-determination. The rule of law, democracy and human rights, these should matter to every one of us. The right to self-determination is a universal right. It is enshrined in the United Nations Charter, and it should apply to the people of Kashmir. It is deeply concerning and causes great pain that for decades, despite numerous United Nations resolutions, we continue to see lives lost, families torn apart, and the Kashmiri people living under absolutely intolerable conditions. And of course, it's deeply concerning that that progress now feels further away than ever. For the Kashmiri people, things are getting worse rather than better. Since August 2019 and the unilateral revocation of Article 370 by the Modi government, we've seen a real deterioration in the situation, as so many of my colleagues have described, seeing it firsthand. People in Kashmir are shut off from the world. I think in the pandemic, we all have grown to understand perhaps the importance of knowing that our loved ones are safe and being able to communicate with them over the telephone or online. Of course, many of my Kashmiri constituents are denied that reassurance. They're unable to keep in touch with family members. And of course, they know, well, the fears must become even greater, knowing not only that they can't see family, that they can't keep in touch with them, but knowing that their family face real and immediate dangers where they are. Ultimately, this conflict will only be resolved through dialogue. As UK members of Parliament, we must redouble our efforts. Working as we are today across party lines, we need to bring pressure to bear. We need to bring pressure to bear on our own government for them to be leading this issue on the international stage. And of course, we need to bring pressure to bear on the Indian government and indeed in Pakistan. We have to get that discussion happening so that we can bring this decades-long conflict that frankly is a stain on global human rights. We have to bring it to a peaceful resolution. And I'm proud to stand in solidarity with all of you and with my Kashmiri constituents and the people of Kashmir and repledge my determination to help do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. I'm now going to bring on Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Uzma, and thank you to President Khan for what was a very stark summary of the current situation. But I wanted to start firstly by applauding the work of the Kashmiri diaspora in Britain ahead of Solidarity Day tomorrow, in continuing to ensure that the issue is kept at the top of the agenda. As Sarah has already said, it's very rare you'll ever hear a media report on the news outlining what's happening in the region. And it was constituents like mine in Salford. We don't have a huge Kashmiri community in Salford, but one constituent of mine, Bashir Rakbi, came to talk to me when I first became an MP and told me the story of what was happening in the region. And I was horrified. And he set up local events in Salford where he invited neighbours, councillors, anybody he could encourage to come through the doors to try and teach people in Salford what was happening. And they were equally as horrified. But we need to do much more than that. Every day, at least one person loses their life in the region, and it's senseless and unacceptable. Now, as the President has said, this isn't an internal matter. It's been an international tragedy for over 70 years. And now with COVID, the situation gets worse every day. And there's been limited reaction around the world about this. I agree with everything that everybody has said so far in terms of having a successful response to this. It means having an international response to the Kashmiri situation that demands urgent dialogue, as has been said, and it must be based on 4 key things. Firstly, the principles of the right of a people with a distinct historical and cultural identity to decide their own future. That's the bedrock of any democratic society, as we'll all agree. Secondly, the sanctity of international agreements worked out by the United Nations, and they must be upheld by the United Nations. Thirdly, a peaceful and stable subcontinent free from the possibility of a regional nuclear exchange. And lastly, the consistent application of human rights standards. That's the only way that we'll reach a peaceful solution to this conflict, which has plagued so many lives living in Kashmir and their wider families across the world for far too long. So thank you for allowing me the time to speak today. We all know that there's a solution. It was determined in 1948, and now it's time that the world powers and the UN ensure that this plebiscite is carried out. And I'll play my part along with all of my cross-party colleagues in ensuring that this is kept at the top of the British political agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm now going to bring on Sarah Owen.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me and President Khan. It's a pleasure and an honour to be able to see you again today, and thank you to the organisers for organising such a fantastic event. When we held the debate in Parliament last month, I argued if you care about human rights, then you care about Kashmir. And I'm so pleased to hear that that sentiment is being echoed, not just in the Chamber of Parliament, but also here on this Zoom call today, and that there is cross-party support for that idea and that feeling. Now, I also spoke about the lockdowns, the shutting off of connections, the terror, the fear in particular that women and girls are feeling, and that this cannot and should not continue. And now also reports of Muslims being turned away from hospitals. That's unacceptable at the best of times. But in the middle of a global pandemic, that is hugely dangerous, and it is outrageous and needs to stop. The atrocities, the rapes, the abuse, and state-sanctioned Islamophobia should be condemned by the international community. And ahead of Kashmir Solidarity Day, I offer my absolute solidarity to the people of Kashmir, but also extend that solidarity to others suffering under Modi's measures. That includes the farmers who are also suffering at the moment. People should live from fear, free from fear. We must see the Kashmiris' absolute right to self-determination delivered, and the international community have a duty to support delivery of UN resolutions. Kashmiris need and should determine their own future. At some stage, I would like to come to an event or a conference where we're talking about what next, and looking forward to the future. And I want to thank the Kashmiri community in Luton North for everything that they are doing, not just on fighting for human rights in Kashmir, but also for fighting for human rights and basic needs in Luton as well. Throughout this pandemic, our diverse community have come together to support each other, and the Kashmiri community in Luton North is absolutely no exception to that. So thank you. So I send our enduring solidarity from the people of Luton North to the people of Kashmir until their human rights are protected. But we must also act. After Brexit, the UK government has an opportunity now to put their money where their mouth is when it comes to human rights. And I really hope that as we move forward together, that we see a moral and ethical case when it comes to future trade deals. So I look forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers. Thank you. Solidarity now and always.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm now going to bring on Mohammed Yassin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. President, thank you very much for inviting us here today. And I commend the efforts Fahim Kiani is making to bring so many MPs from cross parties together and highlight this issue for many, many years. And thank you for all your work you're doing. I think we know how serious this issue is. We know the human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. We know the international community is not taking interest in this, unfortunately, as they should have done. There is not enough pressure, especially on India, to come to sit on the table and have meaningful dialogue with the Kashmiri community and Pakistan and solve this issue. I think as a British parliamentarian here, I think we need to look for the future, what we can do to help Kashmiri community and those Kashmiris who are struggling in Jammu and Kashmir. I think I was reading a comment somebody made in chat box. They're asking us to meet the Prime Minister. I think this is a very important thing to do. I think the APPG on Kashmir, which is cross-party, we know, we need to work with the current government. I think we need to convince our Prime Minister and our government to change their stance, the current stance, that this issue is between India and Pakistan, and international community got nothing to do with it. We all know that India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. They had 4 wars on Kashmir already, and this issue can escalate another war, and that war can turn into the world war. I think it's interest of international community. So therefore, I believe that we British parliamentarians need to work with our government and convince them to change their current stance and work with India and Pakistan and bring them to the table, encourage them, work with them, and help them finding this solution, because it is in their interest as well. Because if they solve this issue and the money they're spending on the weapons and nuclear weapons, they can spend on the welfare of their own communities. You know, the poverty in India and Pakistan is huge. We know the other human rights issues are coming, reports are coming from Kashmir and other parts of India as well. I think we need to convince both these countries that it's in their interest, in the interest of international community, to solve this issue according to the wishes of Kashmiri people. That's the only way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed Yassin. You've raised some great points there about how the conflict is actually stifling development in the region. And could potentially get worse. So thank you very much. I'm now going to go on to Paul Bristow from Peterborough.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all today, and thank you very much, Mr. President. We'll start with an apology that I wasn't here at the very start. I've just been in the House of Commons chamber participating in a debate, but I'm free now, and I just want to show my solidarity, my support to the people of Kashmir at this crucial time. I agree almost entirely with what I've heard so far from speakers. Everything that's been said is informative, well argued, and of course passionate, because when we talk about human rights, we have to talk with passion. And I participated in the debates only a few weeks ago that Sarah Owen introduced in Parliament. And I think that was a really kind of pivotal moment, because we did have cross-party approach to that issue, with people from my party, the Conservative Party, and the Labour Party all working together and acting together, talking about what's going on in Indian-occupied Kashmir. It seems like we're in a desperate situation. We are seeing the violence, we're seeing human rights abuses, we're seeing all sorts of things that we're used to in Indian-occupied Kashmir. But you will also, I put down a written question about the murder of the 3 young Kashmiris that took place recently by the Indian Army. And with Modi and the BJP revocation of articles on the autonomy of Kashmir and their desire to try and weaken the resolve of the people of that area, things look bleak. But in our country, in the UK, I think there's some degree of optimism. As I said, for the first time, I think we're all working together on a cross-party basis to try and increase the plight of the Kashmiri people, working on behalf of our Kashmiri constituents and working on behalf of anybody who cares about human rights. I agreed entirely with, I think it was Rebecca Long-Bailey who made the point, if you care about human rights, or was it Sarah? Sorry, I can't remember. One of the speakers said, if you care about human rights, you care about Kashmir. And we are working together on that issue, which is good. But also I'm optimistic, because I think a light is going to be shined on India and on the behaviour of the Indian government. Because if they want the international respect that they crave, if they want the international credibility that they crave, then they're going to have to act better. And that what's going on in Kashmir cannot stand. And I'm beginning increasingly optimistic as we shine a light on what's happening on the Uyghur population in China and what's happening with the Rohingya population in Myanmar. We have to then shine that light on what's happening with the Kashmiris in Indian-occupied Kashmir. And I think we're winning that moral case. I would also just like to make a point about self-determination. I make this point on a very regular basis, because as many of us said, this is not a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. Far from it. It's an international issue. But even if you ignore the idea that this is an international issue, and I don't at all ignore that, then surely, on a point of principle, this must be a trilateral issue with the concerns of the people of Pakistan, the concerns of the people of India, and of course, most importantly of all, the wishes of the Kashmiri people themselves. This country does not enter, Britain does not enter into any international discussion with Argentina over the Falkland Islands without taking into account the wishes of the Falkland Islanders themselves. Indeed, we went to war over that point and aggression and invasion by Argentina back in the 80s. The same with Gibraltar, that the wishes of the people of Gibraltar are always taken into account as paramount when we talk about sovereignty issues over that territory with Spain. If it's good enough for the people of Gibraltar and it's good enough for the people of the Falkland Islanders, it's good enough for the people of Kashmir.
Thank you, Paul. Paul actually referred to a great example there, because self-determination should be universal, to be honest. Now I'm going to, I'd like to send apologies for Altaf Ahmed Butt. Altaf Ahmed Butt is a Kashmiri from Indian-occupied Kashmir, and he is someone who lost 22 members of his family because of the kind of brutalities there. He would have joined us today, but he's unfortunately been taken ill with COVID. So I'm afraid he can't join us, but he sends his regards. I'm now going to bring on Afzal Khan MP for Manchester Gorton.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure as always to join the President of Jammu Kashmir. And let me start by saying thank you to Tehreek-e-Kashmir, Fahim Saab, Ghalib Saab, and all their team for the work that they do day in, day out in promoting this cause of Kashmir. Here we are today, linked to the 5th of February, Solidarity Day. So I, of course, like other speakers, want to express my solidarity with the people of Kashmir and with what they are going through. And sadly, what they're going through is nothing new, but it's been going on for well over 72 years. And what makes it even worse, I think, is the fact that by day, the situation is getting worse. And in a sense, that whole situation then calls into account the whole international community and actually what they're exactly doing. Having the UN security resolutions is one of the oldest disputes that has not been resolved, actually says something about the UN Security Council itself. And equally for many other countries, including our own of the UK, who has a number of reasons why they should be deeply concerned. Not to forget the very cause of this dispute actually goes back to the British Raj for the hundreds of years that they were there, and when we left, what happened, and still not being resolved. And then I think what makes it even more difficult for me is being a British parliamentarian, that millions of people who have heritage linked to Kashmir, to Pakistan, and to India actually live here, who are directly connected to this issue and it's having an impact on their life. So for the British government then not to take this issue more seriously is concerning. And this then brings me to the point that a number of colleagues have talked about, that we do have increasingly strong APPG in Kashmir, which is a cross-party. And I'm pleased that within the political parties, there are organized groups for Kashmir, which is also happening. I think we clearly need to up our game. 72 years down the road, things not changing. For us to keep coming to the conferences, showing solidarity is not going to make a difference to the lives of the Kashmiri people. It's concrete small steps that actually I think we need to take. And in that context, strengthening our organizations, both of the APPG and within our own parties, I think is important. And here, the wider community has a role as well to ensuring that they reach out to their own MPs to make sure that they join APPG. The stronger the APPG in Kashmir is, stronger is the voice for the Kashmiris, and the more chances that we will have of making that difference. Otherwise, what you're going to get is successive government. It doesn't matter which color of the government it is. They're carrying on sitting on the fence, playing the same sort of language, saying it's a matter between India and Pakistan according to the wishes of the Kashmiri people. That is really not good enough. So for us to change that, I think we really need to up our game, the parliamentarians between ourselves, to make sure the government cannot get away with this sort of language that they keep playing with. And they've been doing it for many decades, not just this government. I speak for my own colors, the Labour Party. So I think that to me is number one. Second point I would want to say, because I know you have lots of speakers as well, which I think it's a great credit to Fahim Saab and his team, that you have so many parliamentarians joining you. What concerns me is actually the whole direction India is taking. And that I don't mean just the terrible events that are taking place in the occupied Kashmir, the complete sort of lockdown, not the lockdown that we are experiencing, but this is absolute complete lockdown. It's economic lockdown as well, education lockdown as well, the internet, the very facility that we're using, all that's locked down. So every layer you look at it, you see how bad that is. But what is alarming, I think, also is on top of that, what we're seeing is how they're flouting the international law, the Security Council resolutions, trying to steal the land of the Kashmiri people against the international law, trying to change the demographic, which is against the international law. And then within their own country, the million of farmers, who are protesting, the brutality that was shown against them, the prosecution of the Dalits, the Christians, the Muslims, systematically all that is happening under this whole ideology of Hindutva. And then to add further difficulty, I would say, is the tension with China. So you end up with 3 nuclear powers, nuclear flashpoint that we talk about. That again, we can't afford. Then when you look at every single neighbor, which is with India, is also experiencing those difficulties. So to me, if we're not careful, there is a very real risk to the whole global peace in the direction that it's taking. I take some heart with the new administration coming in America, Joe Biden, and even today for his statement in relation to Yemen, how that he's pulling his support from that. I welcome that. I think he needs to show similar sort of initiative in South Asia and with this issue of Kashmir as well. And I do hope that he honors some of the words that he and the Vice President has used in the past as well. And I do hope that he also strengthens the multilateral organizations in the world, including the UN itself, so that we really move towards the peace. I had to just to stop here because I can carry on. on the issue of Kashmir is something I'm passionate about, close to my heart. I just want to say, look, thank you very much for this opportunity and solidarity to our brothers and sisters Kashmiris. Keep up this fight. Ultimately, our cause is just, we will have that victory. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. I'm now going to bring on Alison Thulis from, I believe, Scotland. She's the MP from Scotland.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Alison Thulis, Member of Parliament for Glasgow Central, and I represent the SNP. So you will find in me certainly a common cause in the fight for self-determination. And I very much recognise that need for the people of Jammu and Kashmir to have their say in a referendum to decide their own future. We have had this opportunity in Scotland, and we believe it's fundamentally important that all people around the world should have that right, regardless of where they are, and should have that ability to represent themselves and to ensure that their own future is in their own hands. So I bring to you tonight my solidarity from both from myself and my party, but from my constituents here in Glasgow Central, where there are many Kashmiris who wish to see a positive future for their country, a future where they can make the decisions which affect them and have their future in their own hands. And also with many constituents who are not Kashmiri but send their solidarity also. And I think it's important that we have that wider coalition of support of people of all backgrounds, of all faiths and of all nationalities, in ensuring support for the people of Jammu and Kashmir and making sure that that case is made wherever we can make it, whether it's in the House of Commons, in the United Nations, or indeed on the streets of Glasgow when we're able to come back together in that way. And my solidarity and thoughts go also to the people who have been living under these conditions in Jammu and Kashmir for so long now, not being able to go and see their friends, not being able to communicate with their families as they would wish to do so, and living under severe lockdown conditions. And I hope very much that we will be able to make this, inshallah, come to an end soon with the cooperation of everybody in the international community. And I thank you so much to the President and to all who have come together here tonight for the work that this is ongoing to this end, and you absolutely have my support and solidarity with all of that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alison. I'm now going to bring on Sam Tarry from Ilford South. Sam Tarry, MP.
Not just in the Labour Party, but actually throughout this pandemic, and has played a really key role in our local youth-led efforts. Really was always community that once stood up and said that they're going to make sure that they do everything they can. So real solidarity and support for the rest of the folk that live in the time. But today it's really important that I'm here in their voice the best I can on the national issue of Kashmir and its sovereignty. So MPs can come and talk about the national issues of human rights. I know when I sit in hundreds of people.
Hello, sorry, Sam. Sorry to interrupt you. I think a few of us can't hear you properly. So could you maybe check your mic? If you try speaking for us again, and we'll let you know if we can hear you or not. Yeah, I think we can't hear you there, Sam. Do you want to try turning your mic on and off and see if that works? On, off, and then on, maybe? I'm afraid we still can't hear you. Sam, I'm going to come back to you because your mic seems to be glitching. I'll come back to you after the next speaker, okay? Okay. Can I please have on Tahir Ali, please? And then we'll go back on to Sam afterwards.
Assalamu alaikum. I was expecting to come in after a few callers, so you caught me out there, Uzma. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I would like to thank the Kashmir Campaign UK for organising this event on the eve of Kashmir Solidarity Day. Now, it is almost a year ago where on the 5th of February last year, I made my maiden speech in Parliament. And that was based on Kashmir and the atrocities that are being carried out against the Kashmiri people. A year on, I don't think the situation is much better, and the international community, as I said in my maiden speech, seem to be deaf towards the plight of the Kashmiris and the atrocities that are being carried out against them. Now, as it is a humanitarian issue, putting aside the long-standing issue of the independence of Kashmiri and the right of their self-determination, more needs to be done by successive by the governments of the Western world and across the globe. We cannot ignore the crisis in Kashmir and just say it's an issue between Pakistan and India to resolve. And sadly, that has been the position of successive UK government. That position needs to shift. That position is no longer tenable. If Pakistan and India were able to resolve this bilaterally, then it would have been resolved by now. Now, kicking it into the long grass and saying simply it's an issue between India and Pakistan, and then putting our own economic interests ahead with India over and above the Kashmiri people, I do not believe it's right. That position needs to shift. It needs to shift between the major political parties and other countries that believe that it's simply an issue between Pakistan and India. Pakistan needs to be on the front foot in terms of pushing for this, and it is only then when it becomes an international issue that we need a peaceful resolution in terms of this right for self-determination. Alison spoke before me about the referendum that the Scottish people got. The British people, the UK people got a referendum on Brexit. And if they have been able to get a vote on Brexit, the Scottish people have had their opportunity whether to remain part of the UK or not. Why is it that Kashmiri people are still waiting 70 odd years after this dispute to get that vote of right of self-determination? That it itself, as I mentioned, will not be resolved simply by India, simply by Pakistan. It needs an international push on it. It needs international resolve to this, whether it's through the United Nations or another forum that needs to be set up. But importantly, we cannot go on like this year on year, coming to these events and repeating what we said the year before. So my polite would be, I will do all I can to make sure that position of bilateral issue on Kashmir between Pakistan and India needs to be shifted, and we need proper policy discussions on this through all the Kashmiri organizations in this country, and to raise the awareness and highlight the plight of the Kashmiri people, because if they haven't got the international community to turn to, then this matter will not get resolved by Pakistan or India alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to quickly go back to Sam. Sam, can you try now for us?
Better.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Great.
Right, great. Look, apologies for that, and apologies to our international guests. And look, thank you. Great honour to be here with the President and representing Ilford South, where, as many of you will know, we have a huge Kashmiri community, a community that's not only involved in our local Labour Party very proudly, but involved actually in leading our local mutual aid efforts, a community that's really stood up and taken charge of the situation, so that, you know, so many people who are struggling during the COVID pandemic have actually had assistance from the Kashmiri community. And I've been really proud that my office has been working alongside them. But we're here today, obviously, to talk about the outrageous situation that people in Kashmir continue to find themselves in. A number of my good friends from East London in the last year have even faced the shelling and burning down of their own homes because of the Indian Army firing mortars over the border into different parts of Kashmir. And this is clearly something that's totally unacceptable. And I think that many of those families have still found themselves suffering across the course of the winter, unable to rebuild their houses in time before the winter set in. And so what you'll hear today from many of us in Labour Party is our absolute solidarity and support with the people of Kashmir, because the right to self-determination, the right to be able to choose your own future as a people, is one which is incredibly important. And as an internationalist party, one that's supported struggle across the world to ensure that people have the freedom to choose their own destiny, then this is something that needs to be and will continue to be pursued from our Labour Party from the very highest levels. And I think that it's really important that people in Kashmir know that not only do many constituencies across the country, including Ilford, have that direct link through people's families and lived experiences to Kashmir, but they also have the support of the elected representatives of those communities as well, in challenging, the outrages that have gone on, of standing up in whether it be to the Indian government or even indeed sometimes to the Pakistani government when they're not doing enough to help people in Kashmir. Because this is an issue that has gone on and on and on. And similar to Palestine or Yemen, there are so many things where actually too often people are unable to stand up for themselves, have just been left out of the debate. And actually what I think we want to hear centred more, and what I'm interested in doing in Ilford, is centering the Kashmiri community and their voice really at the middle of all of the discussions, because we know that as a former colonial power, we have so much responsibility for so many of the places around the world that for many decades have been left in such a mess. And so actually, when people say that this is such an Indian or Pakistani issue and that you should stay out of it, I don't agree with that. I'm an internationalist, I'm a socialist. I think that we need to face the responsibilities of what our empire did and the mess it left in many parts of the world. And so actually there is an opportunity for us to support, both in our own communities and internationally, any struggle, including that of the Kashmiri people, for self-determination. Because if the problem was created by us in the first place, then the reality is we do have a responsibility to be part of a process of bringing a peaceful and just resolution to the ongoing situation there. And too often, I'll hear the stories directly from people in my constituency about their grandparents or their brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles who've suffered under the lockdown that's been imposed in many parts of Kashmir. And for people that say that Labour's support for Kashmir is an anti-Indian idea, is completely wrong. Because actually, I'm as pro-Indian and pro the people of India as anyone, representing a community that has a huge Indian community as well. But what we are, and clearly are, is pro-human rights, pro-justice, and pro-self-determination, democracy. And that's really the key thing that I want to get across today, that we are able to speak out on this issue from the privileged position of being parliamentarians here in the UK, and to use that position to support our constituents, to support their friends and family, to actually make sure that the torch of justice is always shone on the issue of Kashmir.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much. I think you've made a very good point there that, it's not talking about human rights. It's not offensive to anyone. We just want peace in the region. We want a final end to conflict and avoid, further tensions. So I think that's a great point, that it's not about being anti-Hindu or anti-India, but actually about everyone working together and working to get, and, finding a peaceful solution where everyone is considered. I'm now going to actually bring on Liam Byrne now.
Osma, thanks so much, Mr. President. Very good to see you again. Friends, thank you so much for inviting me along today. It's a real pleasure to follow on from such excellent contributions. And really, I just want to underline the point where Sam finished. There is no doubt that human rights is always a multilateral issue. Human rights is never simply a bilateral issue. And that's not just my opinion, it's not just our opinion, that's the opinion of the Foreign Secretary. It was the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab who said to the House of Commons on the 3rd of September 2019, the issue of human rights is not just a bilateral or domestic issue for India and Pakistan, it is an international issue. So there you go, from the very top of government, a very clear assertion that human rights must always be a multilateral issue. Second, there is no doubt that human rights are being abused in Kashmir. Again, that's not my opinion, that's not our opinion, that is the opinion of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. He wrote on the September 2018, in Kashmir, our recent report on the human rights situation has not been followed up with any meaningful improvements or even open and serious discussion on how the grave issues raised can be addressed. Even the Home Office Minister at the time, Mark Field, had to promise to the House of Commons to do something about this when he said, we note the findings of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, which are deeply concerning. So there's no doubt that human rights are a multilateral issue. There's no doubt that human rights are in jeopardy. And there's no doubt in the law that the transgressions which we see today trigger multilateral action. If you look at the detail of the 1971 similar agreement, it is very clear that no side, neither India nor Pakistan, is allowed to unilaterally change materially the situation. Yet that is precisely what India has been doing over the last few years. And when you go back to our own obligations in this, go back to the instruments of accession signed on the 26th of October, 1947, we made it very clear as a party to that agreement that constitutional changes implemented by the government of India were grounds for renegotiation of the whole deal. And then on top of that, just to make things transparently clear, you've got the UN Security Council resolutions, obviously now in breach. So there's no doubt that this is a multilateral issue. There's no doubt that human rights are at stake. There's no doubt in the law that the transgressions by India should trigger a complete reassessment of the situation. So why isn't there progress? Why isn't there a government here in the UK that is so deeply culpable, that is not leading the argument for a different kind of settlement and for peace and justice for the people of Kashmir? Friends, there have been something like 295 violent disputes around the world since 1945. 171 of them were resolved by negotiation. Without doubt, the thorniest issues were resolved by good people coming in to broker solutions. That was true of President Carter in the accord struck between Egypt and Israel. That was true of Richard Holbrooke, who came in to help settle the dispute in former Yugoslavia. That was true in our own country when we invited Senator Mitchell to come in and help broker peace between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So, there is a strong track record in the international community of how we need to address the kind of injustice which is being perpetrated in Kashmir today. And it is frankly high time that our government learned from the lesson of history, learned its obligations from history, and actually did the right thing by calling India out on the transgressions and demanding in the international community a process for justice and resolution. And until that great moment dawns upon us, frankly, we will keep meeting like this, keep making the argument, and keep calling out for justice and peace in Kashmir.
Thank you, Liam. I'm now going to go on to Tamanjeet Singh Jesse from Slough.
Hi there, Uzma. I was just having a bit of an issue unmuting. Thank you very much, Uzma, to yourself and to Fahim and all the organisers, and it's good to see Mr. President again. Thank you also to Muhammad Azad Jaral and many of my other Slough constituents who made sure that they extended this invite to me to attend today's conference. This is an issue that is a human rights issue, and that is why it touches the lives of all of us, and all of us that are peace and justice loving people. we want to ensure that everybody is able to live in a peaceful manner where their safety and well-being of their families is not in question. And that's why you'll see parliamentarians from across the spectrum, and it's good to see so many of my Labour colleagues here as well, that we are constantly standing up for yourself within Parliament. Tomorrow marks the 550th day since the lockdown, since the shutdown of internet, and all the horrors that we have seen since then. And the likes of myself have spoken up in Parliament, but I think many people out there watching the conference, they might be saying, well, look, it's very easy enough for the MP of Slough sitting in the UK to be talking about these issues. But I am somebody who was true to what I believed in. And even during my recent India visit, I did make those points there as well, that I did not agree with the revocation of Article 370. I think that that goes against the essence and spirit of what was agreed, and that's the splitting up of the state and to the constitution of 2 union territories under the direct control of the centre goes against the spirit of what the Kashmiri people wanted and what the ground reality should have been and was before as well. And the imprisonment of elected representatives of the people is also something which goes against the grain of democracy as well. So we need to make sure that when we're standing up for human rights, that we're speaking up for those issues. It doesn't matter whether that's happening in India, in Pakistan, or in any other country across the globe. We need to be making sure that we are always on the side of human rights and on for the rule of law as well. So in terms of going forward, I know that there are a lot of speakers, and I'm trying to make sure that I'll keep my remarks fairly brief, but we will continue to stand in solidarity with the good people of Kashmir to make sure that in Jammu and Kashmir, all of the various communities can live harmoniously together, that nobody is under constant lockdown and having their freedoms restricted in such an onerous manner. And I do hope that the government there will be ensuring that everybody has access to the internet and to other facilities which all of us here in the UK take for granted. You can also rest assured that when it is about respecting the rights of minorities, that we, the likes of me, will continue to speak up. Indeed, recently when we had the mob attacks on the minority Muslim community within India, the likes of me were speaking up. Even when it's about the farmers' protests which are currently happening, the likes of myself again have spoken up. And indeed, many MPs like myself, when it's issues affecting the persecution and the genocide of the Uyghur Muslims in China, or whether it's the Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, or whether it's what's going on in Palestine, or whether it's going on in terms of human rights abuses anywhere else in the world, it is our moral duty to be speaking up for those people, because we never know when we ourselves may be inflicted by such sad and precarious situations. That's why it is very, very important. But thank you very much once again for inviting me, and my very best wishes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. I'm now going to go over to Philip Bennion, who is a former MEP for the Lib Dems.
Right, okay. Sorry, I was just having to unmute myself. It was several stages in the process. Yeah, I've been listening to the other speakers with interest, and what I am starting to see here is a much more unified approach. You'll know that in the past I've been extremely critical of the Kashmir lobby for being so divided, for having a huge multitude of organisations which don't always have the same message, and I think that over the years has impacted on the effectiveness of the Kashmiri lobby in terms of getting a just outcome for the Kashmiri people. Now, I do believe that there is, it might be an outside chance, but there is an opportunity presenting itself just at the moment. But this is going to require a concerted international lobbying. And the opportunity, as I see it, is that at this moment, we have a new administration in the United States, which has already put feelers out to the EU. The EU has already put feelers out to the Biden team. And this is in terms of forming a large democratic alliance to counter what we're seeing from China, which is a real challenge to democracy worldwide, where they're actually proposing their system as a legitimate alternative to liberal democracies as we know them. And it's very, the murmurings you get from the people who are involved in trying to pull this together are that they would very much like India to be part of this movement. I mean, the UK will almost certainly join in with this, as will Australia, probably Canada. But there is a view that if they got India on side as well, then they would have a very powerful lobby. Of course, Japan would be involved as well. Now, there is obviously obvious potential here for leverage, because the big blot on India's democratic record at the moment is, of course, Kashmir, and having unilaterally ended autonomy in Kashmir. And we know that the American the new democratic administration have already made comments on this. So by putting the two together, there's a lot of pressure that can be put on India in terms of joining this international move to try and prevent this pernicious Chinese approach to international affairs that we see at the moment. And India very much wants to join this group of democracies as well. This is what we're hearing. So the quid pro quo could be that India actually comes to the table on Kashmir, because at the moment, of course, the big problem at trying to get, I mean, we've heard speakers earlier talking about the bilateral approach doesn't work. Well, the bilateral approach will never work while one of the two parties actually refuses to even consider even coming to the table. They're completely deaf to all overtures. So the fact that we now have the potential to lever them to the table, I think at least should be, we can see some encouragement. But it's not going to happen unless there is a very strong push from everybody who's interested in this issue to get those liberal democracies who are trying to pull together to actually sort of say to India, look, you could be part of the club, but only if you actually come to the table on Kashmir. So I think that's that's an approach we can take, but it's the time window is limited because as soon as this, as soon as India is fully involved with this process, then the leverage has disappeared. So this is something we need to get a move on with and really press, particularly in the United States, which is going to be the biggest driver here, but also with the European Union and the UK government, that if they can all pull in the same direction on this, then maybe something can happen. And I think I'll leave it at that, because most of the other points that have been made by all the other speakers.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to go on to Lord Rajid Khan. Rajid, I think you're muted. Just unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I couldn't mute. The host wouldn't let me mute. Thank you very much, Uzma, for your excellent moderation and Fahim Kiani Sahab and Tehreek-e-Kashmir movement. Mr. President, it's an absolute honor to hear from you this evening in the UK, and I salute your patience, because coming towards 11 o'clock in your time, and you're still listening to MPs' contributions. And myself, as a new member of the Lords, I have realised that we need to do much more to get more of our colleagues from the House of Lords to be involved in these seminars, and that's a mission which I will undertake in the next few weeks and months as I enter the Lords. I think Liam Byrne hit the nail on the head by saying there are lessons to be learnt from history. If you look at the European Parliament, and where I've met you a number of times, and you've been there and done a fantastic job in educating, informing, and raising awareness of the issue, Mr. President. The Parliament and the European Union was, after 1945, learnt a lot from what happened in World War I and II in terms of building peace. But the lesson is that India and Pakistan can be France and Germany, and more recently, in terms of Ireland and the UK, this can happen. And I think the first most important point is Kashmiris have got to be at the top of the table, and they are the main contestants in the future dialogues between countries. I think we need an honest broker, like we saw with Norway in the 90s with the Israel and Palestine. I think there needs to be an honest broker, and I think it can be here. From what I've seen and heard over the last few days, the United Kingdom Parliament has a moral duty to do whatever it can to resolve the Kashmir issue, because unfortunately we were never really good at partition. Whenever we did partition, it never worked out well. We might have intended well, but history has shown us we haven't served them regions well. I'm not going to say too much because I would like to hear your concluding remarks. Just to say that Kashmir Solidarity is not a day where we attend webinars and go away and hibernate for a year. I think the day is about renewing your hope and vows and working and planning the year ahead for the Kashmir cause and strategizing. And we need a really effective policy moving forward. And I look forward to the lockdowns ending and we can have physical interactions with each other. And I can just use this opportunity to say we need solutions, we need to work effectively. And I'm confident through the work that we've seen over just the last few weeks, Sarah Owen, in terms of securing the debate in the British Parliament. I just say that this is the first time I'm seeing that is such tremendous momentum, force from here in the United Kingdom, members of Parliament, both houses, to move forward to support the cause. And I'm thinking under your leadership in Kashmir, unprecedented levels of interaction you've completed over the last few years. I think you've been a fine ambassador for peace. And like I said this at the end, this is not about Kashmir. This is about humanity. I'm not Kashmiri background, and nor my colleagues on this call are. This is about them human beings, them mothers and sisters, them children that have been shot at by pellet guns, and them people that have been disappeared by the force. And last point I'll make to you. I have lots of brothers and sisters in India that I speak to you, and they're equally horrified with what the BJP or RSS-inspired government's doing to its people. It can't be bilateral and unilateral or bilateral, because human rights are universal. It's about humanity, and we will always speak out against human rights abuses. And inshallah, one day we'll see Kashmiris have a future of their own. Thank you very much, Uzma.
Thank you, Lord Wajid Khan. I'm now going to go back for President for closing remarks. I understand it's very late now for him, and thank you to all the MPs who've been holding on. Thank you, Wajid. I think you've held on quite long. Thank you so much. So, Mr. President, Your Excellency.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? First, my thanks to Fahim Kiani. You've done it again. Thank you, Tehreek-e-Kashmir, because people have responded to your invitation, and they took out their time and they attended this webinar in such a large number. I'm really overwhelmed and touched by their presence and by their remarks. One thing that has surprised me that, the parliamentarians in the United Kingdom are rushed for time. They do not have this kind of time because they had to rush to the committee meetings or to the debates in the House of Commons or House of Lords. But today, they participated in a detailed discussion and they made substantive contributions. And I think that this was a great way of expressing solidarity with the people of Jammu and Kashmir, because they demonstrated that they cared about the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Another thing that I want to underline is that they did not mince their words. They did not indulge in double speak. They called a spade, and from all parties, came forth this strongest possible expression of solidarity with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. So thank you, all the speakers and the British Parliament. I was really touched by this remark by Mr. Tony Lloyd, who said, "You will be victorious." He gave this message to the people of Jammu and Kashmir that they would be victorious. And I hope that his prediction would come true. I would also like to say, I mean, Mr. Steve Baker made this point, that India is trying to impose this gag order on the international community, on the British parliamentarians. I mean, there's a gag order, as we call it, a lockdown in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. There's a lockdown around Delhi today. So they want to extend that lockdown to the British Parliament, to the British parliamentarian. He's rejected it. Others have rejected it. And they've said that they would speak up, and they would speak out. Thank you so much, Steve Baker and all other parliamentarians. Many speakers have underlined the need for a political solution. It takes two to tango. And we on this side of the table, the people of Jammu and Kashmir, the people of Pakistan are present and keen to engage India. India has disappeared from the negotiating table. It's not there. And we can't have a monologue. I mean, we're having this dialogue with the rest of the world, like we are having this dialogue with you today, but we can't talk to India because it has chosen the path of military aggression against the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And as many speakers pointed out, that this would not lead to a solution. Whatever triumph they would have would be transient. It would not be lasting, because you can't just transplant people and brutalize indigenous people and occupy the territory and make it a part of your federation. It doesn't work out that way. Now, many speakers have also cautioned us and warned us that, look, there are two nuclear powers, and Kashmir is a tinderbox, a trigger for a nuclear escalation. So it is an international issue. It can't be called a unilateral issue, unilateral matter, or a bilateral issue. I would also like to highlight that when we are dealing with Kashmir, we are also dealing with the rise of fascism. And I'm not exaggerating the situation. You ask Indians, for God's sake, what the Hindutva is doing to their society, to their societal fabric, so to say. And what is it doing to the minorities? And these are not minorities, these are pluralities, like Muslims, 200 million, Dalits, 250 million, Sikhs, Christians, and they've been treated as second-rate citizens, outsiders, non-natives. Now, one of the MPs mentioned, and I want to repeat that theme, that you speak up for the Kashmiris, not because you have Kashmiri constituents. That's important, I understand, in electoral politics, but you speak up for Kashmiris because you are promoter and protector of human rights and you care for humanity. And these remarks are very reassuring. Let me also say that the people of Jammu and Kashmir can't abandon the right to self-determination under any circumstances. They have sacrificed 500,000 people. 500,000 people have been killed since 1947. They would not give up their struggle, and they would not be subjugated, and they would continue their struggle. Let me also say that when we talk of the United Kingdom, we look up to you. We look towards you for leadership. I don't know what your self-image is, but we think that you can still broker a deal, or you can still act as a catalyst, either a senior statesman from the United Kingdom. You can play a critical role in moving Pakistan, India, the people of Jammu and Kashmir, the United Nations, in fact, towards the resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. Somebody said that if you care about human rights, you care about Kashmir. That's a takeaway from today's discussion. Let me also tell you that this issue of Jammu and Kashmir, I mean, this comes up again and again, whether it's a unilateral matter or a bilateral issue. It's not a bilateral issue. It's a falsehood that India has been peddling and repeating for years and decades ad nauseum, but it has made no impact. It's to start with, it was a trilateral issue because the three parties to the dispute were Pakistan, India, and the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And then, of course, there was the United Nations representing the international community. So it became a quadrilateral issue. And as the United Nations, in the role of a guarantor of the right to self-determination of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. People also talked about President Joe Biden. We hope that President Joe Biden would demonstrate statesmanship in regard to Kashmir. President Biden, during his election campaign and during the primaries, made very supportive statements. And now is the time to follow up on those statements and take concrete steps. I don't expect him to be a mediator because he's serving president, and it would be difficult for him to tilt either towards India or Pakistan. It would be a difficult choice. But he can catalyze the situation. He can nudge the United Nations Security Council towards a decision-making mode. Or he can nominate or suggest the name of an international statesman, either from the United States or United Kingdom or Nordic countries or Europe, who can be impartial. And he can be a good faith mediator, a good faith facilitator, who would be trusted by all the parties. I would also suggest another proposal that I want to make is that the British parliamentarians, since they have held these debates and they are Friends of Kashmir groups in the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, Lib Dems, please have a conversation with your counterparts in the US Congress, because they, in 2019, they held these hearings and they heard these testimonies. And there's this Tom Lantis Commission. They held hearings on Kashmir. Please engage them. Your voice, your advice would matter. Somebody said very wisely that it is also a British issue. It is not just an issue of Pakistan or India, because it is British legacy. And I think we hope that British would demonstrate leadership in steering processes towards a resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. One thing that I want to say, that speaker after speaker referred to the situation in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir as a lockdown. Lockdowns are designed to save lives, like the COVID-19 lockdown. Kashmir is under siege. Please use the word siege. It is under military siege. People are besieged in their houses, in their homeland. I'm just coming to the last 3 points of what I have to say. Somebody suggested, I think that this was Mr. Mohammed Yassin, who suggested that it would be a good idea to call on Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Please do that. Please convey your concerns to him and persuade him as the leader of the United Kingdom to activate the Security Council, to engage the United States, and the United States would heed United Kingdom's advice. Convey these messages that you are giving here today to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Mr. Phil Bennion mentioned that there should be international lobbying. Yes, absolutely. Because if you would continue to do what you're doing in the United Kingdom, it will not make an impact. But if there's an interface between you and other parliamentarians or other civil society leaders all around the world, that would make an impact. The impact would be exponential, as a matter of fact. The last speaker was, as a matter of fact, Wajid Khan, and we are grateful to him because he made a monumental effort in mobilizing the European Parliament, and he held a hearing. Because of him, a hearing was held there, and later on, a plenary debate was held in the European Parliament, and last year, half a dozen resolutions were tabled, which, as I said, were shelved because of the pressure from the Indian government. Finally, my last line is that, and he said it, and I want to repeat it, this is not about Kashmir, this is about humanity. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Uzma Rasool, for very competently and effectively moderating this discussion. I'm privileged to have had this conversation with you. I'm privileged to be in your midst. As a matter of fact, I recognize most of the parliamentarians, and in fact, I met them. And I feel, I have this feeling as if I belong to your family. And we are kind of like-minded also. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fahim Kiani. Thank you so much, these parliamentarians. You have touched the hearts and minds of the people of Jammu and Kashmir today. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for joining us and continuing to be a great ambassador for Kashmir. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. We understand you're super busy right now because of COVID, and at the moment, things are just all over the place in the UK, but thank you for taking your time out and coming along. We are hoping that after lockdown, we can hold some more private meetings and actually discuss strategy and stuff. So we are hoping we can do some more stuff once lockdown ends and work on some constructive ideas. So yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.